Okay, we're ready to go. Thank you.
Great, let's restart. This February 21st, 2022 virtual meeting of the Mount Horeb Area School District's Board of Education shall come to order. Roll call, Diana.
Here.
Jim?
Here.
Leah?
Here.
Rod?
Here.
And Jessica?
Here.
Thank you. Our student rep, Owen, will not be with us tonight, and we just heard that Mr. Hanna will be absent as well. Dr. Salerno, has this meeting been properly noticed and certified? Thank you. If able, will you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Item 1B. Jim, would you please read our mission statement this evening?
Sure thing. The Mount Horeb Area School District, in partnership with the community, is dedicated to nurturing, educating, and challenging all students, preparing and empowering them to be productive, responsible, and self-fulfilled members of society.
Thank you, Jim. Item 2A, approval of the presented revised agenda. Unfortunately, our highly anticipated recognition night for those dazzling art show students is postponed due to the weather. So please keep in mind removing item 3A, and I'll take any other revision requests along with your motion.
Motion to approve.
A second.
Motion made by Leah and seconded by Jessica to approve the agenda minus item 3A. Further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Motion passes. Item 2B, approval of the February 7th, 2022 board meeting minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Motion made by Jessica, seconded by Diana to approve the February 7th board meeting minutes. Further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Motion passes. Item 3B, school news. Dr. Salerno, what do you have for us tonight?
Well, good evening, everyone. I want to extend a note of congratulations to not only Owen, but all of our DECA team students who are competing at the state competition tonight down in Lake Geneva. They actually got an early start on the road just because of the inclement weather that's anticipated. I do want to mention the fact that we are closely monitoring the weather in anticipation of tomorrow's commute to school, and we'll have an answer shortly, as I've just gotten off a phone call with the National Weather Service, and we'll be trying to get on a call here with my fellow superintendents around the region. I also want to take a moment to talk a little bit about the mask mandate that is about to be lifted here in our district and throughout Dane County. That actually becomes effective on March the 1st. And as a result of the Board of Education's previous work back in November of 2021, and then also with their direction that the superintendent iron out any kinds of the details, masks will be optional for Vikings beginning on that date. Now, there are a couple of exceptions, and I want to note them here for you tonight. School buses and other transportation that are covered by federal masking requirements, meaning that the use of masks on our school buses will still be required. And then regardless of vaccination status, someone who is exposed to a COVID-19 positive individual and identified as a close contact can either quarantine for 10 days or return to school wearing a mask for 10 days post initial exposure date. Similarly, someone who contracts the virus and is ill can return on day 6 if they're fever-free for 24 hours, they're without fever-reducing medications, symptoms are resolving, and if they pledge to mask on days 6 through 10. Now, we will be implementing a one-strike policy on this. So if you're not wearing a mask and you're supposed to be wearing a mask as a result of the fact that you've come in contact or you yourself have the virus, the individual, they're going to go home until their quarantine period is completed. Now, for students and staff in grades 9 through 12, we'll be returning the responsibility of contact tracing back to Public Health Madison-Dane County. Rest assured, though, those who are medically fragile and their high school students will continue to be contact traced through our health services team. And in grades K through 8, we will continue our practice of contacting the entire classroom or an entire team about positive cases. Now, in the event that a COVID activity and or the number of symptomatic individuals rise in a particular classroom, this is the part we hope to God we never have to implement, but we may implement and have to implement a targeted masking protocol. That would mean requiring masks for a certain class based upon the numbers of students in that class who are symptomatic. Or in the very worst case scenario, and gosh, I hope we don't have to do this, move to a virtual place. That would be a decision made in consultation with school and district leaders, our school nurses and health officials. We do anticipate posting information on our district's website about all of this and also in our board recap tomorrow. But lastly, and if you hear me say anything, please hear me say this, I urge you to extend your continued grace and your compassion to each other and those in our community and reserve judgment regardless of your position. I have no doubt that we all have the best interest of our students, our staff, and our community at heart. Our shared commitment to a physically and socially, emotionally safe and supporting learning environment is essential to our continued movement forward. Now, please allow me also to note our primary election was recently held, and I know you join me in extending our gratitude to all 11 candidates who sought a seat on the board. Their sense of civic duty is appreciated. And we are going to advance, it sounds like, 6 candidates to the full spring election that takes place on Tuesday, April the 5th. Now, as we have done in years past, Mr. Malecki's students in our current affairs class will be holding a candidate forum in the middle school step room on the night of Wednesday, March 9th at 6 p.m. And just as so people can kind of get a feel for what happens after that date, after the April 5th election, we'll have the oath of office will be administered at the board's April 18th meeting, and the board's reorganization meeting will take place on May 2nd of 2022. Now, you may recall during our last Board of Education meeting, it was reported that there was a drop in January 2nd Friday pupil count. Our Associate Superintendent of Business and Finance, Scott DeYoung, we wanted to learn more about where were these students going? And I'm quite frankly, I'm glad we asked. We found some data entry errors and other potential discrepancies, likely dating back to September 2021's count. Now, in order to better understand this error, I've called for an enrollment auditor to visit with the individuals who help with this work. Mistakes happen. My word, I've made a number of doozies in my time. So my goal in bringing an auditor is accuracy, correcting the mistake, and making certain that the individuals, we're all learning from it. We will continue to keep the board apprised of these developments and appreciate the grace given to those involved. Last but not least, the WIAA girls basketball game that was scheduled for tomorrow night between Portage and our school district sounds like it's going to need to be changed to Wednesday night in the event that we have to call off school tomorrow. So please keep your eyes peeled in the event that we do need to make some weather decisions. That's the end of my report. I appreciate you allowing me to go a little extra longer than I normally do.
Thank you, Steve. That was very helpful. Would any other board members like to share school news? All right, let's move on to item 3C, citizens' comments. Due to our virtual format, those wishing to speak should please text their first and last name plus address to 608-250-9166. Again, that number to text to register to speak for your citizens' comments is 608-250-9166. Dr. Salerno, did we have any registrations come through before the meeting?
No, not yet. Mm-mm.
Okay, I'll wait a bit. Again, that number is 608-250-9166. We also offer a second citizens comment period at the end of our meetings, and you can register for that at any point during this meeting. Last call. Any registrants for citizens' comments? All right, a second period again is offered at the end of this meeting. Let's move on to item 4A, personnel transactions. Dr. Salerno, do you have any remarks for us?
Board members, just a note that there is an addendum to tonight's documents.
Board members, questions or clarifications on the personnel transactions? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve with the addendum.
So moved.
A second.
Motion made by Jim, seconded by Jessica to approve the personnel transactions with the addendum. Further discussion? I have a question. Dr. Salerno, can you, or maybe Sarah Eartha might be the right person, could you publicly speak to the paid internship position? I see that's not a customary line in our personal transactions, and I wonder if that may be of interest.
Yes, very good. Sarah, would you want to speak to that
Hi.
about our efforts to recruit talent?
Yeah. So thanks for asking the question. It is definitely a more unique position. We have been looking to bring on somebody to assist in our social work capacity. And at this time, despite our best efforts, we have not been able to secure someone. However, we have a really talented individual who's been working with our current social workers and doing her student teaching. And we've worked with that university and the student to be able to secure her to help us out in a capacity that will allow her to do a little bit more, still under the supervision, but she's going to be able to help us out with that while we kind of reconfigure that social work need for next year.
Thank you, Sarah. Further discussion or questions from the board? Then back to the motion on the table for personnel transactions with the addendum. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Motion carries. Our personnel transactions are approved. Item 5, our consent agenda. Would any board members like to pull out letters A through C to remark individually? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Motion made by Jessica, seconded by Leah to approve the consent agenda. Further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Motion passes. Moving on to our discussion items. Item 6A, committee member reports. We will start with Mr. Hayes, please, for the Community and Legislative Engagement Committee.
We did not meet, and therefore I have no report.
Thank you, Mr. Hayes. And Mrs. Roth, I believe you were absent for the last Education Committee meeting, but perhaps you or Sarah Straka would like to highlight something for the group.
I was out, so I don't have a report, but the minutes are attached.
Sarah, anything notable to mention?
I'd say that we had some guest presenters who are also present at our Safety and Wellness Committee meeting tonight, talking about a staff self-assessment survey surrounding about equity. And then we also discussed policy 893, conducting research in schools. That is on the board agenda tonight for first reading.
Great, thank you, Sarah. Well, let's move on to our action items then, beginning with work from the Personnel Committee. Item 7A, a second reading of policy 722.1, reporting workplace accidents and/or injuries. Do any board members have any additional questions for Ms. Eartham or wish to propose final clarifications?
Motion to approve.
Second.
I'll second.
Motion made by Leah, seconded by Diana to approve policy 722.1. Further discussion? Those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Motion passes. Item 7B is second reading of an employee handbook language related to health insurance. And again, do any board members have any additional questions for Ms. Eartham or wish to propose final clarifications? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
So moved. Second.
Motion made by Jessica, seconded by Leah to approve the health insurance language in our employee handbook. Further discussion? Ms. Eartham, thank you for leading that employee Q&A time around this topic. I heard that you did a great job. So back to the motion on the table. All those in favor to approve the health insurance language changes say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Motion passes. Item C from the Education Committee, first reading of policy 893, conducting research in schools, with Mrs. Straga.
Thank you for that. That was quick. So yes, as I mentioned, we had a conducting research in schools policy that was updated. This policy was brought to the board back in 2019. We only had some small updates, as you may see in your board packets. That was the red line version. And we added language connected to FERPA and making sure that FERPA confidentiality language was added to the policy, as well as the PPRA, which is the Protection of Pupil Rights Amendment. And that was also added, particularly in that fourth bullet there. And then we just also wanted to make sure down at the bottom of the policy that we included both the FERPA legal reference as well as the protection of pupil rights. And then I guess I briefly, or I too quickly move forward ahead. On the first page, Dr. Salerno, near the bottom, the second to last paragraph, just talked about including a notification process to the Director of Instruction, adding that portion, which is me, if there's a belief that with the, making sure that the written approval goes not only to the principal, but to me as well.
Great questions for Sarah. All right, as not everyone is present tonight, we will need to see this first reading at future meeting to vote on. So let's please move down then to work from the Finance Committee. Item 7D, a first reading of policy 620, annual operating budget. Mr. DeYoung.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for allowing us to have the next three policies brought to you from the Finance Committee. Thanks to the Finance Committee members for your engagement last Monday as we began our policy review. The document that you'll see up on the screen is, as Kimberly mentioned, is policy 620. Just a side note, we were fortunate to have the Wisconsin Association of School Boards review policies pretty much across the board. And so this gives us an opportunity to dive in a bit deeper in our finance practices and to look at where we need to firm up some of our policies. So policy 620, I'm happy to note that the items that we're suggesting for revision in the policy is consistent with what our practices are. Nevertheless, we need to provide that update so it's detailed in the policy itself. And essentially the update refers to the Board of Education formally approving the preliminary budget prior to having the annual meeting published and noticed, and which the board already does. But again, it documents it into the policy. And then the second update is after the annual meeting, having the Board of Education recognize that budget as its original budget for the fiscal year. And that would happen no later than the meeting when the board adopts the levy, which would be that last board meeting at the end of October. those are the two updates. Thank you.
Questions for Scott? Okay, again, as not everyone is present, we'll see this policy at a future meeting. Scott, stay on the line. How about a first reading of policy 622, budget hearings and reports?
So this particular policy has to do with the important pieces of information that we include in our annual report. And so you may recall we have our annual meeting each year in August, and there's an annual meeting booklet that goes with that meeting. And so the items that are being updated in this policy has to do most importantly with, again, WASB's recommendations, but it's things that we already have in our policy book relating to the annual meeting. And so a few of the updates include making sure that we're providing our cash balances for the district in the annual report, which certainly we do that. That we make sure that we provide estimates of our expenditures and our revenues for the year, and we certainly do that. We also, number 5, addresses that we need to include our tax levy in the annual meeting booklet. Of course, we do that. We also have a debt service schedule that we provide in the annual meeting booklet, and we want to make sure that is also spelled out in this policy. And then at the bottom, letter C is a brand new section of the policy that has to do with the information that we report in the booklet for our Fund 73 Post-Employment Benefit Trust. And the board's always been so supportive of maintaining and contributing to that trust, making sure that we have dollars that we're setting aside for commitments that we have for retirement benefits. And so in the Post-Employment Benefit Trust section of the annual report, we need to include the amount of the trust, the amount of the investment return, and the total disbursements that we've had since the last annual meeting. If you refer back to the last few years, you'll find that information in our annual meeting, but it was not documented in our policy. So we want to make sure we get that included as well. That's a summary of the updates for this particular policy.
Very thorough, Scott. Any questions? Hearing none. Scott, you want to take us to 623.1, budget exchanges and transfers?
Yes, thank you. So this particular document has to do with how we recognize and report budget revisions that need to be made over the course of the fiscal year. So for example, later in the agenda, you will see that we have some budget revisions that we need to make, which we typically do during the month of February. This particular policy spells out the process that we use in which to do that. The changes that we're recognizing are under the budget transfer section of this policy. We actually had a policy that was a little bit more strict than what the current law requires for posting budget revisions. And so the School Boards Association recommended that we just make our policy consistent, even though it allows for a little bit more leniency in terms of how we document and post those revisions. Nevertheless, the update will be consistent with current state statute. So the change is that we will post budget revisions within 15 days of the board's approval. Historically, we always followed a 10-day rule. And then historically, we've also, and we talked about this at Finance Committee last Monday, we've also posted revisions in our Mount Horror mail the week after budget revisions are adopted. State statute says that that's fine, but a school district can also simply just post those revisions on its website, and that satisfies state statute. So we can do either or. The Finance Committee thought it may be best to continue with our current practice of posting revisions in the newspaper so that we connect with a wide audience. Nevertheless, we are still updating this policy to reflect what the statute suggests.
Very good. Questions for Scott? Okay, we'll see this trio of policies back soon for our second reading. Thank you, Scott. Can you
Thank you.
please then continue with the consideration of those budget revisions you mentioned?
Yes. Thank you again for allowing me to continue here. So the document that you'll see up in front of you is something that you may recognize from previous revisions. It allows us to make necessary changes to our budget based on things that happen from time to time in our fiscal year. It's very common for us to get into the fall and winter, and at that point find out what type of state and federal funding we'll receive, especially in the form of grants. And so these revisions, you'll see there's two tables here. The table that's on the screen is the general fund, and then the one below it is the special education fund. And so in the general fund, as we discussed at finance last week, the most notable change is you'll see an increase of just over $321,000 in federal sources on the revenue side of the general fund. The purpose for that increase is the governor's coronavirus relief fund. They decided that rather than providing school districts with half of the allocation this fiscal year and the additional other half next fiscal year, they decided to give school districts the entire amount this fiscal year. And so in December, we received that allocation. This was not something that we budgeted for back when the board did its budgeting a year ago for the current school year. And so we need to account for that in our budget. Now, it's important to note, because it's revenue, we need to recognize that, in fact, we received over $321,000. But because the district hasn't made a decision about how to use those one-time dollars, and it's important to note that, in fact, they are one-time dollars. So this isn't something that can be included in our operating budget to use year after year. Nevertheless, we want to recognize the revenue. At the point in time that the Board of Education down the road decides how they want to invest these funds, then certainly we can make a modification to our budget to account for the expenditure. So the way the budget is set up right now with the receipt of these one-time funds, it's showing a projected budget increase in fund balance of $321,324 for the current fiscal year. On the expenditure side of the general fund category, you'll see some adjustments in both instruction and support services, and that has to do with some personnel modifications. We have people that, change benefits during the year and so forth. And so with our budget being 80% personnel, certainly when we see modifications in our labor, we need to account for that in our budget. On the special education, which is the second table down below, much smaller activity in terms of the dollar amounts, but this also has to do with both state and federal funding and modifications that need to be made in the personnel side of the house for special education. Special education, as a side note, keep in mind, does not carry a fund balance at the end of the year. So you'll always see a zero fund balance where we're balancing our budget. And thanks again. I forgot to mention this. Thank you again to the Finance Committee members for your engagement last Monday on this as well.
Thank you, Scott. Any questions for Scott? All right, I'll entertain a motion to approve these budget revisions.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Motion made by Jessica, seconded by Diana to approve our budget revisions. Further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Our budget revisions are approved. Item 7H, our 2022-2023 CISA 5 service contract. Dr. Salerno.
Yes, good evening again, board members, community members. Every year we enter into an arrangement with CISA 5 for the purposes of providing services to students who need deaf and hard of hearing services, as well as visual orientation and mobility. We're asking for the board's consideration of this year's contract, please, and thank you.
Motion to approve.
A second.
Second.
Motion made by Diana, seconded by Jessica to approve our 2022-2023 CISA 5 service contract. Further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Our CISA service contract is approved. Item 7I, Youth Apprenticeship School District Affiliation Agreement, 2022-2023. Mrs. Straka.
Hi. Each year, we also have an annual agreement to participate in the Dane County School Consortium. And we are one of 16 school districts in Dane County who participate in this consortium. Our students learn about youth apprenticeship, see some services from this program. And this mainly comes from the Dane County School Consortium, but it also supports Jody Baber, who was our youth apprenticeship and school to career coordinator. She also works closely with the Dane County School Consortium to make sure that she places students in quality placements within our community and sometimes within our greater community. There are 11 areas of study that are offered by the Dane County School Consortium. It just opens doors for our students as they look for academic and career planning and future employment. We have about, it fluctuates, but we're in the mid to upper 20s of the number of students this year who take part in the youth apprenticeship program. So we're looking forward to continuing our agreement with them.
Thank you, Ms. Straka. Any questions for Sarah?
I have one question, Sarah. When you scroll down from what's on the screen, the spaces that are blank, like arts or finance, and it says, under, well, it says under returning level 2, nothing. And then are those programs that we don't currently have, or we just don't have a coordinator? Do you see where I'm at? Like it
Yep.
says Jody's name and then it says Katrina, and then there's a few blank spots. So I didn't know if it just meant that we didn't have staff for those programs, or if those were apprentice areas that we just didn't offer.
Jody Baker, you are correct, is the school coordinator. I don't know if on this contract, if they started to put student names. Did you see just the first names that they are identifying?
Yeah, I was
I'm
just
sorry,
curious.
Sarah. Didn't mean to interrupt you, Sarah. Those are teachers' names from other districts. I don't believe those are student names.
So, okay. I was just unclear as to who they were, or what they indicated.
So do we need to amend that form then if there's students under the coordinator name?
This was
Well,
pre-populated
Dr.
for
Slater
us.
said they're teachers.
This was pre-populated for us, so we will go ahead and we'll make those changes when we sign the document.
Very good. Further questions for Sarah? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
A second.
Motion made by Rod, seconded by Jessica to approve our youth apprenticeship agreement. Further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Our next youth apprenticeship agreement then is approved. Item 7J, consideration of ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 funding. Mr. DeYoung and Mrs. Straka.
Well, good evening, everyone, again. The document that Dr. Solano has up on the screen is a budget for both our ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 plans. Sarah Straka and I had the opportunity over the last few weeks we were able to update in DPI's grant program. The items that you see on the screen are the line items that we were able to enter into the DPI program. And keep in mind that for both the ESSER 3 and ESSER 2 funds, collectively, it's just over $1.1 million. ESSER 2 districts have through September of 2023 to utilize those funds in total. And the ESSER 3 funds, we have until September 2024. And so through the engagement of staff, certainly the Board of Education and the activities with the community, we were able to come together with what we believe to be a workable budget for the next 2 years. And I think it's important to keep in mind, remember that both of these ESSER programs are one-time dollars. So of course we have to be very sensitive to including these dollars in our operating budgets so that we can avoid a funding cliff once the 2 years is up. And so you see on the screen right now, there's an ESSER 2 budget, and then down below later on, you'll see an ESSER 3 budget. So I'll stop there on the budget side of the house. And thanks again to everybody from the community, staff, from the Board of Education that engaged in the activities to allow us to get to tonight where we're able to show you a budget with line items. So I'll stop there and I'll allow Sarah to step in on the curricular side of things.
Thanks, Scott. If the Board of Education remembers and any community members on our call remember, we, like Scott said, offered a presentation. And on one of the slides, we laid out a tentative plan for the personnel side of the house and the professional development side of the house. And our plan that we presented virtually relatively mirrors what you see before you tonight. And then just one point of clarification as well, that we combined those two pots that Scott's talking about, the ESSER 2 and the ESSER 3, in our minds into one pot. So when we're looking at any personnel increases for 2 years, you may see an ESSER 2 and ESSER 3, for example, a third grade teacher for ESSER 2 and a third grade teacher for ESSER 3. That's the same first grade, or that's the same third grade teacher. It's just for 2 years. We're having that position using two different pots of money. So I just want to make sure that that piece was clear to the board and to the public as well.
Please allow me to extend my gratitude to both Scott and Sarah for their great work in pulling this information together. I also want to extend a note of gratitude to our administrative team for allowing us to complete the paperwork that would net us even more money than we initially anticipated. It took a lot of extra time, but I think it was well worth it. It allows us to really handle some of those learning gaps that we saw in our young people who were in grades 1 and 2, kindergarten 1 and 2, when the advent of the pandemic. So having these additional dollars is going to go a long way. And thank you, board, for considering this plan here this evening.
Questions for our professionals?
So, I have a question.
Go
So
ahead,
these new positions are in fact new positions, right? So is the hope in 2 years that either through attrition or maybe by some miracle the state actually gives us an increase in funding that we'll be able to keep these positions? And do we have any concern that we're not going to be able to hire these positions since it's only a guaranteed kind of 2-year funding?
Well, from your lips to God's ears, that hopefully there's going to be some additional dollars that'll be coming to our school district through the next budget biennium. But you're right. The reality is that the longest we can extend a contract to any teacher by law is for 1 year. And if we don't have dollars at the conclusion of the 2024-25 school year, we'll have to look at a reduction in force. We would welcome the opportunity to have that happen through attrition. And we're confident the people we hire are going to do a great job for us that we can hopefully absorb them into our district. But we don't want to make any promises and not be able to deliver.
I have a few questions. If unfortunately we can't hire for all these new positions, I presume that the board would then receive a revised plan about what could happen. And then 2, are we anticipating any internal staffing changes, perhaps movement from role to role?
Yes. In fact, to your first answer, yes. To your first question, yes. You can expect any updates to come through to the board and to the public. It's really important that we garner the input of our community as well. And we're so grateful for those people who joined us on our calls as well as our staff. And then, yes, our goal is particularly with some of our strategist positions. These are people who already know our staff, know our students, and wouldn't it be great to bring them into a role that's different, what I call a teacher on assignment role for the period, and then backfill their position with those contracts that we just spoke of.
Any further questions from the board? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve our ESSER funding plans.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Motion made by Jessica, seconded by Leah to approve the ESSER funding plans. Further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Our ESSER funding plans are approved. Item 7K, consideration of a contract with School Perceptions for the purposes of engaging the community about capital and operational budgetary needs. Dr. Salerno, this was a board-driven request. What would you like to highlight here for us in your work with School Perceptions?
Well, good evening again. I just wanted to maybe set the table for our visitors who are on the call tonight about the rationale behind the work that's being proposed or at least being considered. You may or may not know that the Mount Horbury School District will receive $0 new in state funding for fiscal year 2021, 2022, 2023. And so ESSER money, as Scott DeYoung has just indicated, is not to be used for wage increases. And as you can see tonight, we're working to really tighten our health insurance plan so that we're competitive with our neighboring communities while at the same time attracting and retaining some of the best talent around. Many communities are experiencing or have experienced the very same issues that we're undergoing and have gone to or explored operational referendums to ensure that employees aren't recruited away or programming is not reduced. In fact, the board heard from an outfit who came in and spoke with us about how many school districts just in the past 10 years alone have gone to an operational referendum. All of this coincides with the fact that we still have many critical capital decisions needing to be made. Chief among them is the disposition of the Early Learning Center. And quite frankly, we're at a crossroads. Our community has always helped us shape our long-range planning, and that was the purpose of us bringing together a plan with School Perceptions. How do we gather the entire community's feedback in order to recommend a plan that reflects the priorities of our taxpayers and meets the needs of our students? So we're proposing at the direction of the board entering into a contract with School Perceptions that will allow us to serve, to drive what a referendum, if any referendum might look like. So with that being said, board members, you can see a couple of documents I have from School Perceptions after my call with them recently, and the survey proposal, and then depending upon the board's interest in terms of timelines, whether or not it would be part of this year's gubernatorial election, and if so, we'd need to do some work pretty fast, or if we were looking at something going into the spring of 2023. You can see that as well. In fact, why don't I present these documents for you in case people on the call would like to see them too. I'm pleased to answer any questions you might have, or if there's any direction you'd like to provide after discussion.
Well, I think the survey is a good idea, but I from my perspective just want folks to understand that at least I am not predisposed to a referendum simply because we're doing this survey. I mean, there are a couple different reasons why you do a survey. In my view, now is the time to do a methodologically sound survey to truly gauge where the community is, and not because we're predisposed to take a position on a capital referendum or an operating referendum or both. So I support the survey, but I am not predisposed to supporting a referendum of either kind. That doesn't mean I couldn't be. But I just think that's a very, very important distinction to draw.
Other comments, questions from the board?
Kimberly, this is Jessica. I also support the survey. I think it's incredibly important for us to have the community's feedback as we have these conversations and move forward. My question is, Dr. Salerno, do you have thoughts in terms of the timeline? And do you want us to consider a motion related to the proposal and the timeline both tonight?
Thank you for the question. I wonder if it might be best for us to get that data from the survey, and then that might help guide our work in terms of a potential timeline. I do think just because of some of the requirements of when questions need to be prepared, it will be tight to do something with this upcoming election. And maybe just to look at any potential, if there is a potential for a referendum to occur when there's been enough time to educate the community, get the community's feedback, and then look at putting it on a ballot. So a long way of asking for you to please consider just approving a actual survey to be administered, if that's okay, please, and thank you. Thanks for the thoughtful question.
Thank you, Dr. Salerno. I had the same thought that it would be very speedy and we'd have to rush through the work. So,
Dr. Salerno, was School Perceptions the vendor that we used last time for our referendum?
That's exactly right. Mm-hmm.
Right, okay. I too am in favor of surveying. I will say that I was a little surprised about on page 5 how heavy-handed both in costs and structure that we're seeing, when previously our conversations did really amount to a curiosity to see if the community was interested in such work. I'm sure we can't just cherry pick services from them, but if there's any lower cost options along the way with School Perceptions, I'd certainly like to hear about those.
This is an additional version, as I asked them to sharpen their pencils before they submitted something. So I agree, it does seem quite pricey, but I do think the data is going to be important for us. Well said, Kimberly.
In my experience, it's not. It's in the ballpark.
It's just I'm a deeply cheap human being, Rod. That's what it boils down to.
I hope that characteristic continues.
Yes, it's good for all of us. Other questions or comments from the board? All right, this is an action item this evening. Is there a motion to approve the School Perceptions contract?
so moved.
So moved.
I will second.
Motion made by Jessica, seconded by Jim to approve the School Perceptions contract. Further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. The contract with School Perceptions is approved. Thank you. Item 8, our second opportunity for citizens' comments this evening. Again, due to our virtual format, those wishing to speak should please text their first and last name plus address to 608-250-9166. Again, that number to text to register to speak for citizens' comments is 608-250-9166. Dr. Salerno, was anyone registered to make a comment? Not yet. Last call to be a part of the discussion, 608-250-9166. Steve, anyone tapping us on the shoulder? All right, hearing none, moving on to item 9. Our future agenda items are presented. Would anyone like to make an agenda request at this time? Item 10, our schedule of next meetings is also presented. Anything to highlight here, Dr. Salerno?
Just a friendly reminder to our personnel committee members, we had to postpone last week's meeting. That new meeting is going to take place here tomorrow afternoon, irregardless of what the weather holds for us.
And Steve, before we adjourn, I know this is a bit out of order, but I see the Mount Horbury School District has called my phone. Is there an announcement that you'd like to give?
There is. I think we've made the decision to close schools tomorrow. I regret to say that just simply because of the weather, but also my preference would have been to do a delay. But as you know, many of our bus drivers, they work multiple jobs, and our ability to transport kids in the middle of the morning has been compromised, and we'd hate to start with a delay only to cancel the rest of the day. That's the worst thing I think we can do to our families. So we've decided just to make the decision to call out tomorrow, and let's get back into action on Wednesday. Thank you everyone for your understanding. I know that's not a popular decision with everyone.
Thank you, Steve. I'm sure we all appreciate the advance notice. However, breaking news, no school tomorrow. Item 11, seeking a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion made by Leah, seconded by Rod to adjourn this February 21st, 2022 virtual meeting of the Board of Education. Further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. We are adjourned. Thank you. Good night.